The guest speaker for lunch is going to be Ken Meline, a professional engineer, certified energy manager, and certified commissioning authority, a founding principal of Command Commissioning, LLC, an independent commissioning firm with offices in Irving, Houston, Bethesda, Maryland, and Sao Paulo, Brazil. He graduated from Texas A&M in 1982 with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering and is a licensed mechanical engineer in 7 states. He has over 30 years of experience in design and commissioning of mechanical and electrical systems. He's a member of ASHRAE, the Association of Energy Engineers. BCA, what's BCA? Building Commissioning Association, National Fire Protection Association, National Society of Professional Engineers. And we're happy that he's going to be able to talk to you a little bit about commissioning here while you continue your lunch. Thank you. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Keep eating. My talk today is pretty brief, but it's on commissioning, the science and art of commissioning, and specifically that commissioning applied to high-performance buildings. I'll go at this real quickly, a little overview of commissioning, what it is. We had a little debate in our office whether or not that's needed nowadays, but I think it's still needed. I think that the profession of commissioning still needs to be discussed, and what it is and what it isn't. So I'll go over that real quick. What is a high-performance building? What do we think it is when we're talking about commissioning a high-performance building? Then we'll go over the commissioning of those, and then I've got one last little slide on some of the recent trends that I might go over in the commissioning industry. This is one of my favorite slides. I'm not sure if you can actually see some of these things out here, but those of you who have been involved in a building project, you'll see that top left slide says how the customer explained it, and it works us all the way around to the bottom right, what the customer really needed. And one that really appeals to me is kind of the bottom left one. That's how the project was documented. You see a couple of dots on the ground? So what's funny about that, and I thought, well, why do I think that's funny? Well, because it resonates, because there's some element of truth in some of these. As you look through these, there's some element of truth in all of them. Maybe if you're an owner, the element of truth is that the bottom one there says how the customer was built, you know, with the roller coaster there. So anyways, to me, one of the underlying themes in all this is communication. A good commissioning agent, in my opinion, can communicate both verbally and written. And that, to me, is what's lacking in all of this. And that's, I think, what resonates, at least it does to me. So I've got to just real quick go over some definitions of commissioning. This is an official definition that the National Conference on Building Commissioning come up with. A systematic process of assuring by verification and documentation. Really, I don't really need to read all of that, but there's multiple organizations that have definitions of commissioning. All of them very similar to this one. Some of them have a little twist on them, some of them don't. But this one happens to be by the National Conference on Building Commissioning. And my definition is it's the owner's quality control QA/QC process. If you think about building a new facility, you've got an architect, you've got mechanical engineers, electrical, civil, structural, you've got the general contractor, you have all the mechanical, electrical, concrete. Every single one of those trades has a QA/QC process. So what up until now has been the owner's QA process to be assured that when the owner has a vision at the very beginning of a project, that it's going to end up performing and working the way that owner wants it. So that's just real quickly, that's my definition. It's the owner's QA/QC process. Commissioning is also broken down into 2 major groups, new building and existing building commissioning. The 2 under new building commissioning, I'll talk about a little bit more on my last slide. It's in some of my recent trend discussion. So I'll get to that. We've got recommissioning, retro commissioning, continuous commissioning, ongoing, and monitoring-based commissioning. Some of those are official definitions. Some of them you just see in trade journals and references. Re and retro are just exactly what you would anticipate. Recommissioning being doing it over again. Retro is a building that has not been commissioned before. Continuous commissioning is a Texas A&M Energy Systems Laboratory process that they've developed. Ongoing is mostly referenced in, I believe, in lead references. And monitoring-based commissioning is something you'll see mostly, at least in my experience, referenced when you talk about persistence measures and fault detection type systems. So here's my top 5. Why as a provider do we go to somebody and recommend commissioning? Again, it's a QA/QC process for an owner. It helps them meet their sustainability goals for the company. It enhances reliability of complex systems. I originally got started in data centers, data center commissioning several years ago, and back then, 10, 12 years ago, maybe a little longer, that was kind of the sector of the building community that really could see some value in commissioning. They could quantify the amount of money, the dollars that they would lose if the systems didn't operate properly. So that was how we got started, and that's still today one of the reasons that you would want to do it. It also ensures comfortable, healthy environments for the tenants or employees, facilitates efficient systems operations, reducing energy consumption. And since I already had the 5 up there, I limited it to 5, but if I was going to put a 6th up there, the 6th one is that you end up with a much better trained staff to operate the facility. If you apply the commissioning process properly, the folks that operate your facility will be right there when you're doing the acceptance testing, and you'll end up with a much better trained staff to operate your facility. So I didn't have a graphic for top 6, so it's not on there. So we just have 5. So that's different, though, than what, at least in my experience, why owners and end users actually go and procure commissioning services. Lead points. That's probably one of the primary drivers over the last probably 6 or 8 years, in my experience. They're trying to get some points to get a LEED certification. Again, reliability for data centers, hospitals, labs, improved comfort, obviously reduced energy consumption or some incentives from power companies. And we've seen some recent activity in mandates from municipalities requiring commissioning. And one more thing that if I had the number 6 graphic, so I have my top 6 instead of top 5, I would probably add one more that I've seen here in the last couple of years grow in predominance. We've had a couple of times where an owner would purchase another building, and so discovery of what they have is high on that list. Or we've had a few data centers have some near misses and realize that their facility operators didn't have the basic knowledge that they needed to have to operate their facility correctly. So I would put that probably in my number 6 category. So remember these numbers: $4, $1, and 5 years. This is fairly recent data. I think it's from about 2010. That you can achieve $4 in savings in the first 5 years for every dollar that you invest in commissioning. Again, this is for a new building. I'm not talking about existing and retro commissioning, but this is a study that was done by the National Institute of Building Sciences in 2010. And if my math is correct, you can spend $1 on commissioning services and you get 80 cents in that first year back. That's a pretty good payback, I think, in anybody's book. And another study, this is a little bit older data, commissioned buildings. Anybody have a guess what percentage a commissioned building its energy use is less than non-commissioned building? Anybody? 30? 40? Gosh. I'm not sure if I can do it now. Those are much higher numbers, and this is going to. I'm gonna disappoint everybody. Gosh, I don't know where to go from here. But those are real hard numbers. They are older numbers, but they're facts. A commissioned building historically uses 15% less energy than a non-commissioned building. Now, this might get a little dry. I don't want to dwell on these too much, but these are some of the organizations. If you're procuring commissioning services, these are some of the names, certifications that you might see. There are multitudes of organizations, standards, guidelines, best practices that people use to either qualify commissioning agents or procure their services. You have ACG, which is the ABC Commissioning Group. They have a certification. You can call yourself a certified commissioning authority if you pass their test. They use the guideline, the ACG guideline. ASHRAE, they have several processes there, and you can get yourself a commissioning process management professional designation. You know, I think as I was going through my slides, I left off Association of Energy Engineers. They've also got a certification. NEBB has one, BSC certified. BCA, Building Commissioning Association, for anybody who doesn't know what that, they've got one. And then a few just guidelines that are good references to know from ICC, National Electrical Contractors Association. The cost of commissioning is surprisingly low when you think about the cost of building a new building. It's, you know, obviously depends on the size, what kind of systems that you're going to be commissioning, what level that you're going to be touching the systems. But typically, I don't know that I've seen one that's been over 1% of a construction cost, even in a data center. One more thing about commissioning, and then I'll get on to high performance buildings and sustainable buildings. We've got some of these guidelines. These are some of the world guidelines, kind of the more prescriptive guidelines that you might see from U.S. Green Building Council. You've got LEED. The European one is BREEAM. Estidama's in the Middle East. It's got the Pearl rating system. The World Green Building Council, at least to my knowledge, has no independent rating system. But the one thing that they all have in common is commissioning. So all those sustainable standards, those prescriptive guidelines for sustainable buildings have commissioning as a prerequisite, as a requirement for their system. So for high performance guidelines, again, just like commissioning, there's a myriad of different standards, different guidelines. And so I went through our office and I started asking, so what is a high performance building? I get an answer. What's a sustainable building? And I get an answer. And so here are some standards that I say standards and guidelines, best practices that we would use, to define at least what, in our opinion, is a high performance building. ASHRAE, the big gorilla in the bunch, has ASHRAE 90.1. Most people are familiar with 90.1. They've got standard 55 for thermal environment conditions, 62 for ventilation, and then 189.1 in the green guide. And I know there are more. ASHRAE has just a multitude of aids for people who want to build a sustainable building. You've also got Energy Star, Portfolio Manager, and NIBS have the whole building design guide. So what's the difference? When I polled our office, and that was granted it's an informal poll, I got all sorts of answers, and the folks that came from the sustainable background had their specific definitions for sustainable. The ones from green had their green definitions, and high performance as well. So what I did is I just picked three of them here: NIBS, National Institute of Building Science, ASHRAE, and EPA. And bingo, down there on the EPA, I found what I wanted. Green building is also known as sustainable or high-performance building. That's what I was looking for, because I wanted to come to give a presentation and not worry about whether I said green, sustainable, or high-performance. So here's my proof. Here's my defense. So when I slip up and I say green or I say sustainable, I mean high-performance. And if I say high-performance, I mean the other two. So I've got commissioning. We talked a little bit about commissioning. We talked about what a sustainable building might be, a high-performance building. So then what? To me, it makes a difference if I'm going to commission a high-performance building, whether it's an existing building or a new building. If you think about it, a new building, you really have a blank slate. You can design, at that point, you can design all the high-performance features in a facility when you have the blank slate. And so really, as a commissioning agent, I am commissioning the high-performance building, as opposed to an existing building where you kind of have what you have. You don't really know what kind of budgets there are for repairs, for capital improvements. So that one, I term it as commissioning to achieve a high-performance building. Sometimes you get better buildings and you're commissioning a high-performance building, but typically, in my experience, in existing buildings, we're taking a building and trying to achieve a high-performance building. Existing buildings, or new buildings, we normally have the opportunity to design those or affect the design of those so that they are high-performance buildings from the get-go. A little bit about the process of commissioning new high-performance buildings. You got a design phase, construction, acceptance, and post-acceptance phase. And you see in red there, you got to start at the beginning. You have to start at the beginning. But you need to begin at the beginning with the end in mind. Now, I thought that I was the one that was saying that to my staff forever, but when I Googled it, it looks like that Stephen Covey said that in his 7 Habits book. So it comes from a good source to begin with the end in mind. And I found, I'm not sure if there's professors here, if you have the begin with the end in mind, if the corollary is if you don't know where you're going, you probably won't wind up there. Is that a corollary? I'm not sure what that is, but I found that quote as well, and that's probably at least one of my favorite philosophers of this time, Forrest Gump. So I bring all this stuff up because if there's anything that I could leave behind on the commissioning process is to start at the beginning. It's still prevalent today. It was almost 100% 10 years ago that when somebody said, we're going to commission this building, that really meant some really intense acceptance testing after construction was over, where you're losing the value of the commissioning process if you wait until the mid-process, or the mid-part of the construction process just to start the commissioning. So if there's any takeaway, start at the beginning and have a plan. And when I say a plan, not a commissioning plan, but when you have a new building, somebody has a vision. Somebody has a vision for what that building is, a vision for how it's to perform, what it's supposed to do, all those things. And our job as the commissioning agent at that point is to help clarify what that vision is, so that in the end, everybody is satisfied with what they receive. So you'll always see on a high-performance building an emphasis on that initial document, that owner's project requirements. That is the document that lends clarity to what that vision is for the owner, what that owner wants to see at the end of the project. You typically see the decisions based on life cycle cost. And then one of the bigger debates you'll see at the beginning in this discussion is, what is the benchmark? How do we know it's a high-performance building? At the end, what's our grade going to be? And how are we going to know what that grade is? Is it going to be LEED? Is that the criteria that we're going to use? Is it ASHRAE? Is it ASHRAE building energy quotient, or the standards so much better improved over ASHRAE 90.1, nor are we just shooting for Energy Star scores. Those are all decisions that you need to make at the onset of any high performance or green building design effort. And this list right here is just from our effort, from our experience. These are some of the things that we see on a new building, some of the kind of specific features that we would have to pay attention to as commissioning agents in a new building that's sustainable. You'll see some pretty sophisticated HVAC controls, some lighting controls, some specific systems, rainwater recovery, condensate recovery, obviously low flow plumbing fixtures, and all sorts of indoor air quality and natural lighting type of systems that we see. So commissioning of existing buildings, while it's the same or similar in the process, you'll see if you can read them, you have planning, investigation, implementation, turnover, and persistence. So you're starting with a building that's already existing. So you've got some history, you've got some things that you can work with, but again, just like that last process, we have to start at the beginning. You don't want to go in and just start tweaking things without doing some investigation beforehand. You have to start at the beginning and set up a plan. Know what the goal is at the end. Again, what is it that you want to end up with? You have determined the current facility requirements is the pretty close parallel to the owner's project requirements in the new building commissioning. So you need to understand what the requirements are and then what it is that we're trying to achieve here. There's a reason why an owner would want to call somebody in and retro or recommission their facility. They've got some motivating factors, and those could, energy reduction. Maybe they're trying to get LEED certification. Maybe they're having occupant complaints. Now that's interesting. Probably some people from BOMA here. These statistics on the amount of tenants that move facilities because of occupant complaints is staggering. Code or ordinance requirements would be another motivating factor for retro commissioning, and also utility incentives is playing a big part as well. And again, what's our grade point? How are we going to grade ourselves when we're done with the retro or recommissioning effort? Is it LEED, Energy Star, Labs 21? And another difference that this existing building has that's different than new is that there's a lot of baselining and benchmarking, so that you can accurately tell how you've improved facility. You've got to know how it was operating when you started. There's a lot of normalizing of data. I think the earlier speaker talked about some EUIs and PUEs. PUEs is a specific data center power usage effectiveness number. So in an existing building, there's lots of homework that you have to do to understand where you're starting and then evaluating the data when you're done to make sure that you've achieved what the owner wanted to achieve. And a critical one, the fourth bullet down, the third bullet down, the methodology for repairs and upgrades. If you're approaching a retro, continuous commissioning, ongoing, any of those existing building commissioning measures, you've got to know that there's got to be some money made available for repairs. You're going to find things. You're going to go try and operate a system, and it's not going to operate properly. You're going to have to repair some things. You're going to have to replace some things. So there has to be some money available at some point in that program to improve things, either improve them or repair them to get the system to work right. Fault detection, that's also in my kind of recent trends deal. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that in the recent trends slide at the end. So, and a little bit about this, I didn't want to put anybody to sleep, especially with a full stomach. But with normalizing data, this is what you would do if you're in an existing building and you've got some data that you're going to evaluate. The blue line is the actual electricity use over 2.5 years, and you can see the peaks and valleys, and the outside temperature is the gray line, and you can see that with its peaks and valleys according to the time of year. And you would draw certain conclusions from that as well, but then when you normalize it, you have a little scatter chart, and you can see some trends in the scatter chart, and you would draw different conclusions with normalized data. And I'm not trying to, in these particular slides, draw any particular conclusions other than to show you kind of the level of effort in a recommissioning, retro-commissioning type of process in an existing building, that you would have a different level of effort, if you will, on proving where you're going with the building's energy and consumption. This is actually some, this is not an all-encompassing list. It's a pretty good list of normalizing factors that you would use, whether it's, I'm not sure if you can read any of them, but this came from the California Commissioning Collaborative and their recommendations for how to normalize data. And these are just some of the many factors that you can use. Well, and a lot of people know it. It's, per square foot, energy use per square foot. Per square foot is a normalizing factor. Heating degree days, percent gross floor area cooled. There's just a great amount of numbers that, or factors that you can use to normalize your data for these existing building commissioning efforts. I know that ESL has some specialists in this because it's as much an art to normalize data that it is a science. Okay, so there's a few recent trends that unless there's some questions so far before I get to the next part about recent trends in commissioning. What's that? I'm sorry. How was my lunch? I'll know here in a few minutes. So yeah, if there aren't any questions on commissioning and the commissioning of high-performance buildings, yes?
Are you looking at the building envelope?
Yes. Yeah. And that's an interesting question. The building envelope, up until recently, hasn't been a large part, or really, it's been a very small part of the overall commissioning effort. And I'm not real familiar with LEED, but I understand that LEED is going to be making that mandatory soon. And I like that. And the reason as a mechanical engineer, I relate that back to mechanical systems. And there is only so much improvement that you can make in a mechanical system if your building envelope is poor. I mean, it's responding to what it has to respond to. Similar in a mechanical system, that you have a central chiller plant and you have its remote facilities. The central plant can only respond to what the remote facilities give back to it. And that's the way I relate to building envelope. It's really the beginning source of what you need to test and make sure is sound and fundamental. Did I answer the question? Okay. Anybody, any other questions on the commissioning process? Or thanks for the softball question. I appreciate that. So the recent trends, these are just some things that I've just noticed, and I'm in the commissioning business, and it's moving so fast, and the standards and guidelines are coming out in multitudes that I thought I really need to have a slide here just to show some of the things, at least that I've seen happening coming out. The ASHRAE Standard 202. That's I think June. That's it. Yeah, June of this year is a standard as opposed to the original guideline. Standard has normalized. Dr. Haber was coaching me last night on what normalized language and where it is it requires things as opposed to a guideline that suggests things. So if you're a code authority or if you're another standard, then you need to refer something of equal weight. So they weren't able to reference anything from the guideline and some of the other standards in ASHRAE. So that just came out in June of this year. ASHRAE guideline 0.2, the commissioning process for existing systems and assemblies. That's in its first public review draft out right now. Guideline 1.4p, procedures for preparing facility systems manuals. This is an essential part, in my mind, of what a commissioning agent offers, is systems manuals that help and assist the building operators to operate their buildings. So now, finally, we're getting some kind of a standard that everybody would be able to refer to as a minimum guideline for systems manuals. And technical versus process commissioning. This is an article that came out in ASHRAE in June of this year, and this is purely my editorial comment, but it seems to me that this is kind of a line in the sand being drawn at this point. The technical versus process commissioning being more of a watch the systems, watch the people do their work, make sure all of the correct forms are being filled out, make sure they're all in the right sequence, and then you have a functional building, as opposed to technical commissioning where the commissioning agent is actually on site doing the checks, no sampling, 100% hands-on type of a process. So this is, in the past I've called the process checklist commissioning and technical commissioning, real commissioning, and but it seems like the line is being drawn in the sand. At least this is just from my perspective that ASHRAE is trying to make a distinction between those commissioning services that the commissioning agent is actually on site with technical experts knowledgeable of the system that they're checking, or is it somebody who's checking some boxes to make sure that the procedures. I probably shouldn't say it in that tone. It probably didn't come out exactly right, but I think to me this is one of the more interesting things, at least in my mind, that I'm watching in the industry to kind of see how this plays out. And then the automatic fault detection diagnostic systems. I think there's a speaker later. I think that I'm really interested in listening to see how some of this developments in fault detection systems. These systems that are resident in your building automation and have programs within them that let you know when something has faulted and let you know what you need to do. So that's kind of what my recent trends are. How am I doing on time? We're done. Did? Great.